I believe that Metaphor Refantazio will go down in history as one of the greatest stories ever told in a video game. It has a gripping narrative that will keep you glued to the edge of your seat with unpredictable twists and turns. But more than that, Metaphor's story excels as the most poignant social commentary Atlas has made yet. It's one of those games that will have you questioning the purpose behind your own existence, and wondering if the suffering we endure every day is even worth it when every utopia seems to fall apart. In a stroke of genius, this story is being released during America's most tense election yet, where it really does seem like our modern world is being torn apart by anxiety, despair, and corruption. Despite being a fantasy, Metaphor's story relates to our world so deeply that it feels like more than just fiction. This story hit me on a very deep level, and I want to take you on this journey together so that you can understand why Metaphor is such a masterpiece. The story begins with Luis Guillaburn murdering the king, which sends the nation into chaos, as the king's only heir, the prince, is long dead. But that's actually a lie. Luis sent assassins to curse the prince many years ago, which sent him into a never-ending sleep, all a part of Luis's grand plan to take the throne for himself. We play as the protagonist, who was the prince's best friend when they lived in the Elda village together. The protagonist's default name is Will, but I named him Adrian and will refer to him as such throughout the video. Adrian's journey begins by throwing us right into the action. We're attacked on the road and have to escape through a horde of enemies in the desert. There to help us is our fairy companion Gallica, and she is my new favorite Atlas companion character. She's way less annoying than someone like Morgana, who is always telling you what to do, and more than that, she's a good character in her own right. Gallica is the empathetic heart that contrasts against the dark world this game takes place in, full of discrimination and greed. She feels guilty that she can't do more to help you due to her small size, but then sometimes she just decimates a boss health bar with her fairy powers somehow, and I'm like, can you do that more often? You and Gallica are given a mission to infiltrate the military and deliver a message to a secret contact that's allied with the Elda tribe. You know what that means? This game starts out with its own Attack on Titan Join the Military arc, which is a very fun way to do a tutorial, and on the way we meet this game's best bro character, Stroll. I really liked how, unlike the male side characters of the Persona series, Stroll isn't just another incompetent punching bag designed to make the MC look cooler to women. Stroll is like the main character of his own story, complete with his own tragic backstory. He was once a spoiled rich noble who took his life of luxury for granted, until one day his village was destroyed by the worst monster that exists in this world, a disgusting human. While his village was destroyed, the General Luis gave the order to let his village burn to the ground without any help. Stroll and Adrian head off to their first mission in the military, only for Stroll to have to relive his greatest horror all over again. We are ordered to reclaim the fortress from an enemy, and the enemy in question is a human. We try to defeat the human, but we are easily defeated, and Stroll heroically rushes in to save us. He says that he'll hold off the human so that we can escape, but what he doesn't know is that I'm the main character, so I use my anime powers that won't be fully explained until the end of the game to transform into a magical mech called an archetype. With these powers, we are able to destroy the dastardly human, and as luck would have it, one of the only survivors of the attack is the contact we're looking for, Grius. Gallica tells him his new mission: avenge the king and kill Luis Guillaburn, which should lift the prince's curse. After we go to bed, we wake up in an alternate dimension called Academia, and meet a man named Moore. Moore explains more about archetype powers, and like all alternate dimensions in Persona games, Academia will become more important to the plot later on. We wake up from this dimension and battle our way back to the capital city, where Grius tells us his master plan. He's going to murder Luis, the strongest of all generals who's killed more humans than anyone else, with a kitchen knife. Apparently nobody told Grius that he lives inside of a turn-based anime RPG game where you need to hit every boss 100 times to slightly weaken them. Grius tells his daughter Maria that he'll come back to her after the mission is complete. The next day, Luis flies down into the capital and throws a dead human onto the ground in an attempt to show his power before he takes over the kingdom. However, he is interrupted by a giant moon face that lifts the royal palace out of the ground and into the sky. This rock is powered by the king's magic, and he declares that the new king will be determined by whoever has the most public support after 6 months. While Luis is distracted by this display, Grius charges in from behind with a kitchen knife, but he is stopped midair by chains. The king says that no one can interfere with the election through underhanded violence, and Luis murders Grius right in front of our eyes. Because of this game's breakneck pacing, right after Grius is killed, Luis's necromancer soldier Zorba invades the city's cathedral and turns the royal guard into zombies. We journey towards the Grand Cathedral. Once there, we meet up with the prince's knight Hulkenberg, who failed to protect him on the day he was cursed. At the top of the cathedral, we defeat Zorba, but before we can land the killing blow, he jumps off the building, and his death resurrects the dead human Luis left behind. We defeat this human and save the day, but the guardsmen take credit for our kills, so our heroics are still unknown. A little while later, the #1 candidate and head of the Sanctus Church, Sanctifex Forden, declares that a royal tournament will be held to determine who will be the next king, which launches us into Metaphor's core gameplay loop. This game is a fantasy road trip simulator where we travel the world on our vehicle with legs called the Gauntlet Runner. This takes everything I love about the Persona gameplay loop and improves the pacing. One moment you'll be bonding with your friends on the road, the next you're battling monsters in a dark dungeon. The game also succeeds as a monster hunter simulator, where you buy information on enemy weaknesses so you can theory craft the best combination of characters, archetypes, and inherited skills to overcome the challenge. In Metaphor, the strategic gameplay happens before you even step foot inside a dungeon. Another thing I love about Metaphor is the great cast of characters. One of my favorite characters is Heisme. At first, he is set up to be a runaway knight who became evil and started kidnapping children, only for him to be something far, far worse. A furry. This ex-knight was blamed for the crimes of others, but he isn't just hiding from Chris Hansen in a cave all day. What he's really hiding from is his past. Heisme wasn't there to help his son when he was killed, and his questline is all about helping him confront his pain so that he can move forward. The theme of overcoming tragedy can be felt throughout most of the game's follower quest lines. Grius' daughter Maria copes with the death of her father by trying to do more for her adoptive mother Fabienne. She pushes herself too hard because she's afraid that Fabienne will leave her just like her father. This puts the player into a conflicting situation, since you both want to help her, but you also know that you were a part of the plan that got her father killed, and I felt a bit guilty. You'll tell her everything will be okay, but how can you really say that when you're still trying to kill the most powerful man in the kingdom? Are you just lying to her like her father, who tried to kill Luis with a kitchen knife? The mysterious Alonso might be my new favorite social link in an Atlas game. He's at least tied with the sick man from Persona 3. When you first meet Alonso, he comes across as just another narcissistic sociopath who lies and cheats to get ahead, like many other people in Metaphor's world. But after a few conversations, you realize that he's actually the Dexter of liars, someone who fights manipulative liars by becoming a manipulative liar. Alonso grew up with a poor parapet mother, which is the most discriminated against tribe in the kingdom. He knew that the landlord of their village was ripping them off to get extra money, so he started working with that landlord to steal the money back so that he could give it to his mother. Everything was going so well, until the landlord discovered the theft and murdered his mother. To make matters worse, the landlord tells the villagers that Alonso was the one who put his own mother to death and was stealing the money. Now Alonso is broken. He always told himself that he only did evil to help his mother in such an unfair world. Yet in the end, his lies only hurt everyone around him. Alonso wants to die. He wants to leave this world behind, but he decides that he can't die without helping at least one person. You go to have another meeting with Alonso, only to find him being put to death in front of the crowd. Alonso publicly takes full blame for his mother's death and for stealing from the villagers, and he says that it was you, the rightful king, who brought him to justice. Alonso is murdered in front of you as his last chance to make up for all of the terrible things he's done. The landlord meets with you and gives you all of Alonso's money. You give it back to his village while claiming to be the hero who brought Alonso to justice, but deep down inside you know the truth. The decision to keep the truth behind Alonso's death a secret weighs heavy on your heart, until you find Alonso right behind you, alive and well. As it turns out, the master liar lied again. He faked his death, and will continue trying to use his skills of trickery and deceit to do good in spite of what became of his mother. While Persona 3 is about finding meaning in the face of unavoidable tragedy, Metaphor is about overcoming that tragedy so that you can live to fight another day even when you don't want to live. Alonso captures the heart of Metaphor perfectly, complete with all of the twists and turns you'd expect from a political thriller game like this. Speaking of politics, the political story gets much more interesting after you join Luis's army. In order to get close enough to Luis to kill him, you first have to join him, which leads to some tense scenes, like when Stroll loses his nerve and straight up asks him why he let his village burn down. Through these conversations, you get to see deeper into the psyche of Luis. He's a man who only cares about one fair law that exists throughout all species: the strong survive while the weak perish. He doesn't want something like race discrimination determining the status of a person in society. He only cares about the individual's strength. He's so far removed from ever hoping to create a utopia without discrimination where everyone lives in harmony, because he sees it as inherently impossible in a world as terrible as their own. Despite this, he still carries around the same book as the protagonist, the book about an advanced world where people aren't discriminated against. While working for Luis, he tasks you with recovering the dragon god lance Dracodios, since the next stage of the tournament is about showing off who can get the best ancient relic. You journey into the Dragon Temple, and once you get deep enough in, something strange happens. You find yourself exploring an abandoned skyscraper from the old world, a world that looks just like the utopia mentioned in your book. I've heard this dungeon borrows its design from a dungeon found in another Atlas game called Etrian Odyssey. There are little ear puzzles where the enemy ears move when you move to mimic the gameplay style of Etrian Odyssey, and although this was one of my favorite dungeons in the game, I also found it to be a bit disappointing, which brings me to my biggest complaint with Metaphor. They increased the quality of the mini dungeons you find on your fantasy road trip adventures, but this seems to have come at the cost of the main dungeons. Persona 5 consists of 8 arcs, 9 in the Royal version, each with their own lengthy palace dungeon that has a unique environment, set pieces, puzzles, riddles, and so on. Meanwhile, Metaphor has 6 mini arcs. One of these arcs has no dungeon, and 2 of the arcs have dungeons so small that they can be completed in one in-game day. I'd say there's around 3.5 real dungeons in Metaphor, and even these good dungeons lack the high-quality level design from Persona 5. I said the skyscraper dungeon was disappointing, because imagine if they put the same budget into it as they would with the Persona 5 palace. Maybe we'd start in an Etrian Odyssey throwback dungeon, and that could lead to an explorable piece of the city streets that were protected by the water. Or we could go jumping from sunken rooftop to sunken rooftop. You could do so much with the idea of exploring a ruined modern city in a fantasy world, but it seems like they only scratched the surface. Anyways, that's enough with the negativity. Let's get back to the story. At the bottom of this skyscraper, we find and defeat the dragon god, and since this dragon was the physical manifestation of the Dracodios magic, he returns to the lance and we have our artifact. Back on the Gauntlet Runner, Stroll notices that this lance has the power to repel magic away from you, which means it could be used to murder Luis without being stopped by the king's magic. We decide to give Luis a replica of the spear to display at the tournament while we keep the real one. Then during the next showing of the royal tournament, we ascend the opera house and drop down into the chandelier to kill Luis while he's distracted. Adrian steadies his hand and thrusts the spear right into Luis's heart. But before Adrian can confirm the kill, Luis disappears. You meet back up with your party and are greeted by none other than Luis himself. Despite having been almost killed by a spear, Luis is unfazed and wants to fight the entire party at the same time. I assumed that this overconfident move was because Luis had some trick up his sleeve, but that's not what happens. We win our duel against the damaged Luis, and he falls through the glass onto the opera stage below. He's confirmed to be dead by the Sanctus Church men, and Forden takes the lance Dracodios for himself. This is probably the worst part of the story. Luis was such a cool and imposing villain, and then they just kill him off early to make Sanctifex Forden the main villain, and he just doesn't have that final boss aura. I guess they had to do this to achieve what the plot turns into, but it was still pretty disappointing. Now Sanctifex Forden has the Dracodios lance that can kill any candidate, so guess what happens next? You guessed it. Luis comes back to life and kills Forden with the Dracodios lance. Words could not express my excitement when Luis came back. As it turns out, way back at the end of the first dungeon, the necromancer Zorba had his zombies bring him back to life after he fell off of the cathedral. Then he used his flesh magic to reconfigure his face and he infiltrated the Sanctus Church. The church member who reported Luis as dead was Zorba. Then he healed Luis's wounds and he switched out the real Dracodios lance with the replica the main characters gave them. Luis knew from the beginning that the lance you gave him was fake due to him not being able to feel magical energy coming from the weapon, and he wanted to pretend to die to you so that he could steal back the lance and kill Forden when he least expected it. Sure, there was a chance that Luis could have died if you threw the lance straight into his heart rather than slightly missing, but if that happened, Zorba probably just would have brought him back to life as a conscious zombie anyways. This plot twist shows Luis to be an absolutely insane risk taker who's willing to play Russian roulette as long as it helps him kill his enemies, although he does play with a few extra lives in the barrel. With Dracodios in the hands of Luis, it's all over. He has the lance that can kill any candidate, while he himself is protected by the royal magic, which is exactly why he decides to threaten the King's Rock and make him drop the royal magic chains. This moment made me love Luis so much as a villain. He cares more about his belief that the strong should win than only himself winning, so he gives everyone a chance to prove themselves in battle. In order to get more support in your fight against Luis, Adrian lies and says that he is the royal prince, which causes Luis to challenge you to a duel a week and a half from now. After a short training arc, we fight Luis for the throne in front of the entire kingdom. At first it seems like we're winning, and by at first I mean after dying and resetting like 20 times, but then before we can kill Luis, he claims that the true form of all Eldens are humans, and he turns Adrian into a monster. This sends the kingdom into an uproar, and our popularity drops severely. Before Luis leaves, he also reveals that he knows where the prince is, and he sent an assassin to kill him. Once Adrian awakens from his human form, our heroes decide to head towards the prince's home, the Elden Sanctum. As fate would have it, Luis was true to his word. The whole game was spent trying to lift the prince's curse, but despite her best efforts, here the prince lies dead. Hulkenberg, the knight who failed to protect him the first time, has now failed once again. When close to the prince, the main character has a vision. He finds himself talking to the female voice that talks every time a party member awakens to their archetype powers. She reveals the truth of Adrian's existence. He never knew the prince in real life. He was the prince's favorite imaginary friend. The prince was a weak boy who dreamed of being a strong and capable adventurer, the type of person who could help anyone in need. Despite the prince's physical weakness, he was magically strong, and his magic resonated with the prince's favorite book about utopia. The same way that the dragon we fought in the temple was a physical manifestation of magic that was linked to the weapon Dracodios, Adrian is a magical creature linked to the book about utopia. I absolutely adore this plot twist. In retrospect, it makes so much sense. Although our main character can talk, he always always comes across a bit like an NPC, someone who is too good and simple to exist in a world so rotten. He's always willing to help anyone in need. He looks past race, greed, internal suffering, and he is always strong in the face of despair. He cares so little for earthly desires that he doesn't even try to bang any of the characters on the adventure. Meanwhile, Joker is aggressively flirting with his teacher. In many ways, Adrian doesn't feel real, so the twist that he is actually the creation of an innocent child's dream of what a hero should be is so brilliant. Adrian is too good to be true. The female voice we talked to implanted memories into Gallica's head that Adrian existed in the Elden Sanctum, but in reality, Adrian has no history with anyone before around the start of the game. With all the information revealed, Adrian has an existential crisis, and through it, he realizes his true purpose in life. Adrian has to become the prince that the prince could never be. Adrian merges with the dead body of the prince, and now we can save the world while looking like Gojo before Jujutsu Kaisen's manga fell off. With our new godly aura, we learn the true history of the world from the Elden leader. She explains how the world was once comprised of one intelligent species, humans. The humans built a technologically advanced, safe world. However, their cushy lives did not result in the utopia they thought it would. Their anxiety only got worse with comfort, and since anxiety is the source of all magic, humanity awakened to new powers. They used these powers to wage war against each other, and through many magical experiments, the humans experienced a sped-up version of evolution which resulted in the different tribes. Eldens are the only human tribe left unaltered by magic. The worst experiments of war resulted in the monstrous humans we fight throughout the game. There shouldn't be too many of these experiments left wandering the world, which means that Luis has been using his powers to turn people into humans so that he could kill them and claim that he saved the day. It only took a short few centuries for humanity to destroy the utopia they tried to build, and they returned to tribal warfare like in ancient times. The book about Utopia was a gift the king gave his son and a few other Eldens, but it was never really true. As any viewer watching this currently knows, our corrupt world is far away from being a utopia, although the air conditioning is nice. The genius thing about Metaphor is that it isn't just a fantasy story, it's also a science fiction story, and like all the best sci-fi stories, it details a realistic way humanity could perish if given the wrong technology. I think if we all got magical powers from anxiety right now, America would probably collapse twice over. Similar to what the character Fidelio says earlier in the game, some people living in the technological utopia would long to live in a dangerous world full of magic. Longing for something unattainable is easier than being satisfied, so we are each other's fantasies. With these revelations in mind, we head back to the capital city to confront Luis, only to discover another plot twist. Luis throws off his horns in front of the king's projection, showing himself to be an Elden, and he distracted us with the prince's death so that he could steal the royal scepter from the king. The scepter can't be used at full power until the day a new king is crowned, but Luis can use it to gain an advantage in battle. Before we confront Luis, we do one last training arc where we defeat 4 dragons and save the world in a side quest, and now we're ready for the final battle. I've been dancing around the topic for a while now, so let me state clearly that I think Luis is the best villain I've ever seen in an Atlas game, and maybe one of the best video game villains, period. He's charming, he has max aura, he's cool, yet on a deeper level, he does what all the best villains do. He's evil in a way that makes sense. Luis grew up as an Elden, so he knows the history of his world. He knows humanity struggled to build a utopia, and he knows it only resulted in failure. Then during an attack, his friends and family were murdered right in front of him, and it changed the way he saw the world. Luis sees mankind's constant suffering over anxiety, racism, and dissatisfaction with the utopias they build, and he finally says enough is enough. To Luis, humanity never should have even made a civilization to begin with in a a world as evil as theirs. And so Luis will put an end to it all. The secret behind the king's magic is that the royal scepter absorbs the anxiety of the people, and Luis plans to use this anxiety in combination with a warped version of his family's healing magic to turn every weak person in the kingdom into monstrous humans. We will not return to the days of cavemen, but to the days of dinosaurs. Giant monsters will roam the earth, and everyone will live in a kill or be killed mindset. Luis is such a well-written villain. He's like if you took Griffith and a more extreme version of the Unabomber and combined them into one. Besides, if you lived over the remains of a failed utopia in a terrible world, wouldn't existence seem a bit pointless? Why do you think you would succeed where your ancestors failed? Can humanity ever truly be happy inside of a safe society? Or will we just grow more miserable and insane battling over our definition of what is right? The game is so damn genius because many countries are struggling with these same questions right now. I feel like our modern world is an experiment that we're currently failing. Every government does seem to turn corrupt even when they were built on honest principles. This is the existential crisis metaphor sent me down, because I don't know if the suffering we endure every day will be worth it in the end. On some level, it seems like humans aren't meant to be happy. If we were just like koalas and we enjoyed sleeping all day, we wouldn't have built an advanced society in the first place. We wouldn't need a utopia to run to. Maybe humans do lose too much of themselves in sacrifice to the capitalist society we live in, and we'd be happier hunting deer with spears in the woods like in the good old days. It's so funny, it's almost like I'm turning to Luis's side, and the game does give you the option to side with Luis here and get a bad ending, but if you think about it, Luis's solution is pretty terrible. He isn't going to make us cavemen again, he's going to make life a living hell just to put an end to civilization once and for all, and we have to stop him before it's too late. We fly into the heart of the storm and challenge Luis to one final battle. Like always, it seems as if we're going to win the fight, but before we can finish it, Luis uses the Royal Scepter's magic to help him escape into his airship. We get on our gauntlet runner to go after him, only for hordes of enemies to form around us. Adrian's friends decide to protect the airship while he and the pilot Nuris chase after Luis, and we see our allies get overwhelmed by the monsters while others fall off the edge of the floating rocks towards their death. Nuris crashes the gauntlet runner into Luis's ship, and we have our final battle. Unfortunately, it ends pretty quickly, as Luis uses the Royal Scepter to turn us into a monstrous human. But before Adrian can transform, he tears out his still beating heart and destroys it. As Adrian bleeds out, he reaches towards his book one last time and goes into the alternate dimension of academia. There, Moore finally reveals the truth. Everything we just saw was fake, a fantasy, and a terrible one at that, one with no happy ending. There is no such thing as magic. The real world in the book is just the real world, and Adrian should live there with Moore until the end of time. Adrian protests against this. He says he needs to go back to his friends, which makes Moore angry. He screams,
"Why won't you understand? Please, I don't want you to die. I can't lose anything else. Truly,
Moore continues to explain how he once had lofty ideals like us, but it only resulted in him losing his wife and child.
Reality isn't just cruel. It's cruel beyond any hope of change. That's why I had wished for someone to strike me down and end my misery."
Then Moore finally reveals the actual truth. His real name is Hythlodius V, the last king of Uchronia. When the prince's magic created Adrian, it also created a younger replica of the king that was inside of the book. Moore was trying to convince you that the world inside of the book was real so that his son wouldn't die fighting a battle he can't win, and he won't let you die a needless death without a fight. The king cannot lose his only son again. The king's optimism only ever brought failure, and he is now succumbing to the nihilism nihilism that haunted him ever since his family was killed. The king gave up on ever trying to create a better future in his life and decided to put his only hope into a royal tournament after his death. I absolutely loved everything about this scene. The fake out plot twist into a real plot twist. The emotions the voice actor put into his performance of a broken man who's given up on everything. The fact that from the king's perspective, he really is correct to trap his son away from the terrible world that failed him. It's always interesting in stories when there's a battle of ideals and both characters are correct in their own way. Despite this, the king is far weaker than his son and is easily defeated. In their final conversation, Moore hears the voices of Adrian's allies and realizes that he might be able to unlock the ultimate power to defeat Luis, the king archetype. With hope returned to his heart once more, Moore lets you leave the book with his approval, and we are greeted by our companions who are all alive and well. They created a new heart for Adrian while his spirit was locked inside of the book, which seems a bit difficult, but since Adrian is made out of magic anyways, I suppose it makes sense. Also, the game just did an entire party fake out death. The people falling to their deaths were saved by Heismay's wings, and Nuris's ship was somehow not broken, so he picked people up. I took slight issue with these fake out deaths, not because I wanted everyone to die, but because a late game death would fit the game's central theme of overcoming adversity in the face of tragedy quite well. Unfortunately, they couldn't really kill anyone off because they didn't want to mess up your team composition for the final boss. Speaking of the final boss, Luis has already failed at his own game. He was going to unleash the king's magic with his powers to turn the weak people into humans, and he assumed that the strong would just battle the humans and survive. However, he has already succumbed to his own magic and turned himself into a human, meaning that he can't directly turn the protagonist into a human again. And let me just say that this final boss design is so cool. The first phase is some devilish creature with 3 masks that eats the crucified dolls to heal itself. Then you break the mask and his phase 2 appearance is like the halfway point between Lucifer's beauty and Satan's wrath. The phase 2 music is so good as well. They remix the Academia opera theme into the song in a way that makes it feel both intense and uplifting. I also really like how Atlas decided to make Luis the main villain and stick with it throughout. I understand why someone might like the approach of something like Persona 5, where the main villain is a mystery that you continuously unravel throughout the game, but there's something so satisfying about a 100-hour game that sets up one villain and never changes. The entire game builds up to this one encounter, which makes me feel more connected to the primary antagonist. And while a last-minute switch-out villain is surprising, it's not as narratively satisfying. I really felt the point of metaphor through this final battle with Luis. Luis is nihilism in its truest sense, a person who gave up on society for a good reason, the reason being that no matter how hard we try, every good thing we build seems to collapse. He sees no value in temporary periods of peace broken apart by injustice, and so here we are, fighting to the death at the end of the world just so that things can get slightly better instead of insanely worse. To us, a false heaven is better than an unending hell, and we'd stake our lives on that claim. In reality, the fight against Luis is just as real outside of the game world as in it. It's the same fight that America is going through right now. We have to fight every day not to make our world perfect, but to make it slightly better than it was the day before. To see this principle so beautifully displayed through an exaggerated anime fantasy battle with amazing dramatic music, it really moved me. Metaphor is a game that needs to exist. We stake our lives on our ideals, and through this battle we overcome Luis's final form. The kingdom is saved, and everything looks like it's going to be alright. But a villain as great as Luis cannot be killed so easily. He comes back for one final attack. However, through the belief of his friends and his kingdom, Adrian unlocks the king archetype. Adrian clashes with Luis above the capital for all to see, and slices him in two. At long last, after 2 fake-out deaths and 5 boss battles, Luis has finally been slain, and his dream of ending all civilization dies with him. The royal scepter was destroyed in the battle, and a new age of peace reigns over the tribes without the threat of royal magic. With Luis gone for good, we learn that the female voice that guides each player to unlock their archetype was actually the prince's Elden mom all along. She was watching over her son the whole time and helped lead us to our powers. We fast forward a few years and find Adrian planning another journey. He isn't the type of king to sit on his crown and play it safe. After all, Adrian is the magical embodiment of the hero, and for him, adventure and helping others directly is a way of life. Adrian reconnects with his old friends who helped him save the kingdom, and he brings along Grius' daughter Maria as they embark on a new journey together. Wow, what an incredible ending, and what an incredible game. It has just about as many plot twists as Season 4 Attack on Titan without getting weighed down by plot holes. The game succeeds as a fantasy road trip simulator, a political thriller, and a commentary on humanity's inability to be happy. We strive towards a utopia just as quickly as we tear it apart for not being good enough. As an American, it really does seem like everything is falling apart, and I don't know if we will ever truly fix the damage done to society from new technologies and corruption, but we will keep fighting because it's what we do. Just like with the heroes of Metaphor, fighting against nihilism is the only thing we can do when giving up is not an option.